Hello and welcome to another episode of De-Stress with Dr. Amanda. I'm Dr. Amanda, and this podcast is all about highlighting the often underestimated effects that stress can have on our daily lives. We give you practical tips on managing stress, and today we have another amazing guest. We have Destiny, who is a menstrual cycle coach. Often our periods, our menstrual cycle, and the fluctuations that we go through each cycle for women can be a real point of stress for us. And so I wanted to offer you some of Destiny's expert advice on how you can actually start to hack your hormones and live a life that's more in tune with your body's natural rhythms. I really hope you enjoy this podcast. It is for everybody because half of the worldwide population has periods and the other half have to deal with the people that have the periods and how it affects them. So really it affects all of us. If you enjoy this episode, I really hope that you come along for the journey and that you will listen to more. You can find me on YouTube under Life with Dr. Amanda, and also on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify under De-Stress with Dr. Amanda. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you again next week. So everyone, I'm really excited to introduce you to Destiny, who is a menstrual cycle coach. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Destiny. So I'm just so grateful that you've come on today. But before you introduce yourself, I just wanted to let everyone know kind of how we know each other. I've known Destiny for years. We're both Wolverhampton girls. And we grew up in church together when we were much younger, like preteen and teenage years. But yeah, welcome, Destiny. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm well, thank you. Childhood, literally friends. It's so good to like actually be talking in our, like post-teen years, because I just feel like you're doing such amazing things and it's just great to be a part of it. So thank you.
Destiny.
But yeah, I'm good. I'm Destiny. I am a menstrual cycle coach, and also a wellness content creator on Instagram. And I've been doing that both for about 2 years now, but mainly the creation has been like 3-4 years now.
Brilliant. And her content is excellent, guys. It's just amazing you saying that. It's good for you to come on and do some work with me, but watching your content online, watching your journey, seeing you from, them days, years and years ago to how amazing you're doing now, it's pretty awesome. And at the end of the podcast, I will let you know all the places that you can go and follow Destiny. So make sure you listen to the end. So today's episode, as you know, this podcast is called De-Stress with Dr. Amanda. And the point of this is to highlight the impacts of stress that stress can have on our bodies and on our lives, but also to discuss areas in our life that cause a lot of stress and give us practical tips on how to manage them. And so, as Destiny said, she is a menstrual cycle coach. And the menstrual cycle, which for you guys out there who may not know what that is, that's basically your period cycle, the hormone cycle of how women's bodies work, has such a massive impact on so many people. I would actually say an impact on the whole population. 50% of the world have periods or will have periods, and the other 50% are indirectly affected by it because they often have women in their lives. And our hormones often govern how we live and how we feel. So it's a really important topic. And on another episode, we may touch on it a bit today, what the effects of stress are on our periods. As a GP, I've seen numerous times women going through really stressful experiences and skipping periods, missing periods, and their cycle just going completely out of whack. And so we know that there is an impact and link between stress and the menstrual cycle, but also the menstrual cycle, the way in which our hormones fluctuate around each cycle affects how we feel. And when you don't often understand it, understand how we function, it can cause us stress, not knowing what's going to be happening with our mood or how our body's going to look, and kind of dealing with that. And that is why I've invited Destiny on, because from a lot of your content online, I've seen you doing what I call hacking your hormones, or like hacking your cycle and living a life that's kind of in tune with where you are in the cycle. It's very interesting. And so that's what I'm hoping we can talk about today. So my first question to you is, a menstrual cycle coach. What is that? What's your story? How did you get into all of this?
Okay, so firstly, a menstrual cycle coach is someone who basically is a helping hand, someone who holds your hand between the stages of your menstrual cycle. So from your period all the way to your next period, that's the menstrual cycle. And we are often educating, mainly educating at the moment, but also doing one-to-one sessions with clients, just allowing them to sort of reflect on their own experiences within the menstrual cycle. Um, it can be a bit of a whirlwind when you're going through life and you just have your period and you have your period and you just kind of almost forget about it, especially if you're not affected by it. So having a coach basically just allows you to really take on menstrual cycle awareness as a lifestyle rather than just something that you've learned in school or you've had to go through. And yeah, it can be anything from just learning more about the hormones to actually doing, full on like mindfulness and reflective visualizations.
Mm-hmm.
Again, one-to-one sessions, just helping someone really understand why they might be feeling how they're feeling throughout the entire cycle. So it's something that I didn't know existed. 3 years ago, I think, was the time where the school that I trained at actually was set up. So it's still pretty new.
Yeah.
When I tell people, they're like, "Oh, what is that?" But yeah, I think it's that middle ground really between someone struggling and then maybe someone going to their GP and just having that vocabulary and that understanding to be able to walk into the GP surgery like with the understanding of their own cycle, which I think is
Yeah.
so cool and so needed.
It's honestly, it's amazing being the GP.
Yeah,
When someone comes in with like knowledge of their cycle, and someone's having some kind of issues, and they can say
yeah,
to me, well, when like the week before my period, I feel like this. And I had
yeah.
someone come in to me today who was like really struggling with bloating, and she
Mm,
found that it's always the week and a half before a period, and she gets very
yeah,
emotional then. And then on day 2 or 3 of a period, this changes. And when someone has that insight into their body, it makes diagnosing so much easier and it makes
yeah,
the patient journey so much better.
yeah,
So you're working hand in hand with like doctors and
yeah.
everything. It's really, really useful.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, my experience when I was younger, I struggled so much with debilitating periods. I mean, I was always off. My period would always sort of, well, seem like it would fall on the weekend. So I would always miss church.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always miss going out with friends, or like I'd be missing days off work. And it would just be constantly every single month. I'd miss like day one to day three. I'd just be in bed with excruciating pain. And I did work very closely with my GP. Like she was always checking in on my iron levels and things like that. But I never seemed to really just be able to shake the pain. I spent a lot of time on painkillers throughout school. And they got stronger and stronger as I was able to get some behind the counter. And then
Mm-hmm.
I realized that it was actually affecting my gut health, the amount that I was taking. So I made that brave decision to like not take any more painkillers. I can't remember when it was, but yeah, it was a stressful
And
time
this
for
is
sure.
before you were educated
Before,
about the
yeah,
wow.
way before. I mean, I think in drips and drabs, like in my community, like I was so surrounded by lots of health professionals and like naturopaths and people who knew here and there about certain foods and stuff like that. And I was always
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, maybe I can do this and that, but I never had the full picture. So I was excited to kind of tap into this years and years later.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, I would say that I struggled a lot, but I was able to sort of accept that, I wasn't on painkillers. So this was the real pain that I was experiencing. And then when I didn't have pain, I knew how good or bad it was, if that makes sense, because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sort of masking it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it got to university, I was diagnosed with IBS. which again is a whole nother story. Everything impacts each other, right? So
Yes.
I was struggling a lot with just stomach pains, food intolerances, and painful periods. And then after uni, when my anxiety levels started to really increase, I became more aware of like mindfulness and healthy eating, maybe just more like figuring out what I was eating compared to what other people were eating. And it
Mhm.
was just making me, yeah, just ask all these questions and do all this research. And then fast forward to I think, yeah, like maybe a year or two before the pandemic broke out,
Yes.
I was heading into marriage. I was heading in that direction. I'd been engaged and I moved to London, still with painful periods. I was working in central London, literally like, yeah, central London
In the
is
hustle and bustle.
in the hustle and bustle. Um i i loved it, but at the same time my body was like, Destiny, what are you doing?
Hmm.
And so I had to take time out. We were planning the wedding, the pandemic was starting to break out, and yeah, I just had a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. I
Hmm.
had to let go of certain commitments whilst I was working and planning the wedding. And I yeah, I asked for sick leave, but then actually I became redundant and then put on furlough. So in a
Okay.
way, it kind of worked out because I had just been able to have like all of that time to just
Hmm.
really focus on my health. And I don't know how it was, but I came about some research online, and I worked with a medical herbalist to kind of really look at my periods in a more like holistic way.
Yeah.
So I always used like I always went to my GP and asked for like my bloods to be done, and we looked at all the things that could be done. We ran tests and things like that, and then alongside that, I worked with the herbalist, and honestly, it changed my life. And also, I
Mhm.
will say, having a wedding in lockdown meant that we saved money. And some of the money that we saved was
Hmm.
able to be put towards this investment, which was my health at the end of the day. Because
Yeah.
I feel like when before I was married, I wasn't really thinking about, yeah, like I guess fertility and
Hmm.
reproductive health and just like being able to like look after myself and not have someone like it was a real burden on Dan to have to look after me every single
Hmm.
month, for those times when I'd be sick in bed. So I had to do something about it, and we were able to use some funds to invest in the medical herbalist. And yeah, it changed my life. Over about 6 months, my pain went from like 12 out of 10 to like 5, 4, 3 out of 10 to literally not
Amazing.
having any pain. But in that process, I was learning about menstrual cycle awareness and the
Hmm.
4 phases of the menstrual cycle,
Hmm.
and um, as you said, hacking my hormones in different ways in different times of the month, um, and just slowing down, really, just slowing
Hmm.
down. I left my job. Well, again, I got made redundant after furlough ended, but it was a perfect storm of actually you needed to go through this because
Hmm.
you need to do something a little bit different to what everyone else is doing in terms of work and lifestyle, really. So yeah, I applied for a course um, during the pandemic and forgot about it. And then eventually, like,
Okay.
I got an email saying you've been accepted and we're offering you a scholarship because they had like a scholarship for people of color. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm
Awesome.
doing
And
this then.
you have the time.
I
Then
had
you
the
the
time.
time.
So,
Hmm.
and it was online as well. So I just invested
Brilliant.
that time online. So many different people from all over the world, mainly US, Australia, and
Hmm.
UK,
Hmm.
and some from the Midlands as well, which was like, oh my gosh, hi. It was so interesting to see like so many women coming
Hmm.
together to learn this stuff.
Hmm.
And I said, even if I don't do anything with it, at least I know for myself like
Yeah.
how I'm taking care of myself.
Hmm.
So um yeah,
Hmm.
about 6 months in, I was like, this is definitely what I want to do, like full time. So yeah, now here I am.
Brilliant. That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, because listening to what you're saying as well, I didn't know what you were about to tell me.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah,
it sounds, you had, this is what I call like the stress story.
yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of people, when you see people that you may meet in everyday life, you may meet them online, you see there's some people that are living very intentionally.
yeah,
um really living intentionally and looking after what their bodies, really in tune with things and researching. And when you see somebody that's gotten to that point, they often have a story that's led them there. And so many
yeah,
times I'm seeing stress as like the central thing.
yeah,
You've always had problems with your periods from, when you had
yeah,
periods, really painful ones, but then things started building up in terms of, now you're getting IBS symptoms, and now you're
yeah,
working in busy London, and you're having to take time off, and everything builds up, and the stress level starts to build, because stress has such a massive impact. And when we get to
mhm,
that level, when we're at our capacity of stress level, our body can't deal with constant stress.
yeah,
Our
yeah,
body is only meant to really deal with short bursts of stress.
mm-hmm,
And if you're in a dangerous situation, or something needs to
mm-hmm,
happen that you needs to, push you forward to that. For example, if you're giving birth and you're in a bit of stress, like, yes, you need relaxation there, but sometimes that bit of stress helps your body to become focused and you can get the baby out. But having
yeah,
too much stress that's there constantly, even when there is less danger and less threat around you, it shouldn't be there.
mm-hmm,
And so sometimes, when we see people living as intentionally as I see you living,
mm,
often there has been that level of stress that's just tipped over, and
yeah,
you find yourself having to be more intentional. And
mm,
so I see that a lot of your things, you mentioned quite a few things that you've changed and done in terms of,
yeah,
resting,
mm-hmm,
changing what you do for work, investing in your health. And
yeah,
towards the second part of this podcast, I really want to talk about the practical things that you do in everyday life to make sure you
okay,
don't get back to that stress level.
mm-hmm,
But I'd love to know, though, for those that are listening, um, when it comes to understanding our cycle, so a lot of women are really struggling at the moment with, like you're describing, painful periods. Some
yeah,
may have diagnoses underlying, some may have fibroids or endometriosis, but some may just be having really painful periods, or ones that, they're just not functioning, or really struggling with PMS, and they're wanting to start to understand their cycle, understand their hormones.
mm-hmm.
Where would you say really to start? Do you have any advice for someone that's just starting out and they're like, you know what, something isn't quite right here, just like you felt? Where do I
Mm-hmm.
go? How do I start understanding myself a bit more?
Um, I would say start with actually tracking your entire cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that there are many apps out there that help us to know when our period's going to come. And I've used many of them myself. But one thing I've learned on this menstrual cycle awareness journey is that the cycle is not just the days we bleed, and it is literally, in my case, I have a 25/26 day cycle, rather than the typical 28. And honestly, like tracking, I chart like on pen and paper. I've got an iPad now, so I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, iPad. And I just like, I've got a template on there that I've downloaded offline, and I just write in every day like how I'm feeling from day one all the way to day 25 or 26. And I mark like what was my flow like what was my like bleed like? Was it heavy? Was it light? Did I have cramps? Did I not have cramps? How was I feeling? How tired was I? Did I have energy? And I write as little or as much as possible throughout the entire cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just mark down like the changes in my body. So, for example, if my libido is increasing
Mm-hmm.
mid-cycle, I'll make sure I write that down. If I'm getting a bit more hungry after ovulation, like I'll write that down
Mm-hmm.
so that I know I can see my own patterns. And I think that's really important because a lot of the time, we are experiencing these things in day to day, but we're
Hmm.
just not that in tune to hearing them. And it's not that we don't understand ourselves, it's just that we're not given the time
Hmm.
to really like listen to our bodies. So definitely start tracking. You can do that on apps as well, but I would say it's great if the app allows you to write something in
Hmm.
a box daily, rather than it just guessing for you like how you're feeling, so that you have your own personal data. And
Hmm.
again, if we're talking about people who are really experiencing some of these what I call menstrual shadows, where painful periods or
Hmm.
migraines or PMS, it's great because you can take that to a medical professional and actually say, here, like 3 months, here's 3 months worth of this pattern that's happening,
Hmm.
and you don't have to like do the guesswork and pull from memory.
Hmm. Excellent. So, and that's something that I really need to get into actually myself, is
Yeah.
tracking my own menstrual cycle. For me, I've not had a proper period for like 3 years,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
basically I've been pregnant,
Yeah.
and then I was breastfeeding, and when I breastfeed I have no periods, and I breastfeed for a year, and then I got
Mhm.
pregnant with my second child
Mhm.
after, I think my periods came back for maybe 2 months, and I was pregnant
Okay.
again, and I'm still breastfeeding now. And so
Okay.
I'm coming up to finishing breastfeeding now, and so this is something that I need to do when my
Okay.
periods start again, just to understand my body more. It's just so interesting.
Mhm.
um I was wondering as well, you talked about the 4 different cycle phases of the cycle. Do you mind sharing
Yeah.
a bit of information about those?
Yeah, sure. So the first phase, when you read some literature, um I think maybe American literature, they have like different numbers for the phases and they start
Hmm.
in spring, but typically here we just say that menstruation is the first
Hmm.
phase of the menstrual cycle, and that is from day one of your bleeding all the way to the end of your period, so the end of your bleeding. And then after that would be the follicular phase,
Hmm.
and that would be classed as like the spring phase. So you've got menstruation, which is like winter, and then the follicular phase, which would be that short phase between the end of your period up until ovulation, and that is post period slash the follicular phase. And
Hmm.
then you have the ovulatory phase, which is that um, they say the fertile window. That's the phase where you're ovulating and your skin is glowier, your
Hmm.
energy is higher,
You feel
um,
good.
you feel good, you feel like Superwoman. Sometimes, not everyone
Yeah.
experiences this, but typically, and then after that, once your hormones have reached their peak, you then have a decline, and that's the luteal phase, which is actually the longest phase of your
Hmm.
entire menstrual cycle. So that can be anything from, I think it's like 10 days to, depending on, because some people have like 38-day
Hmm.
cycles and stuff like that. So um yeah, typically it's the longest phase, and that's called the luteal phase. And within that, it's split up into two. So you've got that week where nothing's really happening, but your temperature has risen, and yeah, you feel a bit more calm and balanced in yourself. But then the week before your period, that can be where people can experience PMS and even
Hmm.
PMDD and stuff. So that's typically the like the inner autumn phase, where you
Hmm.
really just want to be hibernating and just getting ready for your period again.
Hmm.
So it can be quite hard to grasp, but once you understand that, like, I see it as seasons. I love nature, and I just see it
Yeah.
as like winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter,
Hmm.
spring, summer, autumn. And it also helps you, as I'm sure we'll talk about, to just to learn how to care for yourself in that way as
Hmm.
well, because it's the same really, like what nature needs is what we need as well.
Okay, and that's so interesting. That's what I want to move on to next, then, really.
Okay.
So we know that these different phases that we're in, like we said,
Hmm.
when you're ovulating, you may feel like, you've got all the energy, you're Superwoman, but then you go into this second luteal phase and you just want to hide away. So what does it
Yeah.
look like I guess the question is, and I'll let you guide me on how best to discuss this.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to live in your cycle or like
Yeah.
move with your cycle, what can that look like? What is there like certain activities you were saying? You're saying about getting in tune with nature. What do you mean?
Okay, so when I say living in sync with my cycle, like that's in
Mm-hmm.
my bio, that's what I help people to do. And really, it's the only way to take advantage of these sort of gifts that we're given for ourselves. Um, because we all can experience that, that superwoman phase and
Yeah.
also the joy of being withdrawn on your period. But oftentimes it's not a joyful time. So how I sort of navigate each season in my menstrual cycle is, again, once you've started to track your cycle, you know where you are. So
Mm-hmm.
I know that if I'm on day, um, what would be good if I knew what day I was on today? I think I'm on like day 20 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've ovulated already and I'm like into this luteal phase now and my appetite is increasing. And so I'm aware of that. So firstly, because I know that in this luteal phase, your body does need more calories and you do want to eat
Mm-hmm.
more. I know that these cravings aren't necessarily me just being feeling crazy
Mm-hmm.
and out of whack and
Yeah.
oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And oh,
Mm-hmm.
I feel just so
You,
out of myself,
yeah, you
like
can take away some of the guilt of it. Like, you know
yeah.
what, my body I know where I am in my cycle. I need
Mm-hmm.
to fuel myself. I need some more calories
Yep.
and making the choices that, or like knowing that's coming up, let
Yep.
me put together some meals that are really gonna nourish me and make me
Mm-hmm.
feel, full and warm and nice. Okay.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I know you love to food prep as well, which
Yes.
I think is great because if you are like able to food prep even just during a week or a weekend, it's great because you can think, oh, like what day am I on? Like maybe my
Mm-hmm.
period's coming up in a week's time or a few days' time. Let me just like put a load of sweet potatoes in the oven and make some broccoli or just like get some protein ready just so that when your period actually comes, you're not scrambling around to fuel yourself with the fuel that you actually do need and
Mm-hmm.
deserve.
Yeah.
And this allows you to take some of that stress away. Like we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
stress, like the stress really comes in each phase when we don't actually give ourselves the space that we need to
Mm-hmm.
actually thrive. So in each phase, we can definitely thrive, believe it or not, even during our periods.
Yeah.
Like we can have a great period, but I think just without that making
Mm-hmm.
space, we tend to just become more stressed because we're not fueling ourselves or we're not moving in the right way or we're not resting,
Yeah.
literally. Yeah.
Okay, that's so interesting. That's the thing. When you get to it, honestly, I think it's so such disservice. I think women
Yeah.
have been just, like handed this card where I think we're just like amazing humans, people, as women. There's
Hmm.
so many different facets to us, the way in which our bodies work, the things that our bodies can do. And yet, because of the society that we're all a
Yeah.
part of, all of the research, the money, everything has really gone into things that directly affect men. And so we're
Yeah.
just now coming into a period of time where women, we're actually learning more about ourselves. And like you
Hmm.
said, the menstrual cycle, if you're able to understand it and you're able to give yourself the right food and you're able to give yourself the right activities, like, I've heard people saying, people that have like quite busy corporate jobs or are directors, they're often like schedule their big meetings and
Yeah.
presentations for the ovulatory phase, and then
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
do a lot of like individual planning stages more when it's the
Yeah.
luteal phase. They
Yeah.
organize less meetings, and like if we understood that, people make it seem as though your period, the fact that you have a menstrual cycle, can be this hindrance,
Yeah.
when really it's like a gift. If you
Hmm.
understand that, there's moments where we can really just lean into those things and we can
Hmm.
thrive so well.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, and that's something to think about, listeners. Let's track our periods and start to understand what are you needing at that time and can you give that to yourself.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
I wanted to ask as well, just in terms, 'cause you did say about painful periods, and that's been like
Hmm.
quite a prominent thing for yourself. What
Yeah.
do you, is there anything that's worked really well for you in terms of managing the pain when you're having your
Yeah.
periods? Because you said that you don't take the painkillers anymore. What
Hmm.
does a period look like for you now?
It's so different now,
Hmm.
honestly. I was reflecting every time I have my period now, I'm like, we've been in this house 3 years. We've been married just almost 3 years now.
Hmm.
And when I first got here, when we first got married, I was in so much pain. And now when I have a period, I can walk out and go for a walk. And it seems really crazy to say because some people don't aren't affected, but me being able to go for a walk and do activities and be mobile is
Hmm.
literally a blessing. It's a miracle. But there are
Yeah.
definitely things that have helped. So number one, I mean, I said I worked one to one with a herbalist, so that was really important for me to do. But um, just using things like chamomile tea and red raspberry leaf tea, which we always hear about, but
Hmm.
I experienced it firsthand that consistency is actually the name of the game, really,
Okay.
because I would drink lots of calming teas when I was younger, but I was never like really consistent, and it wasn't like enough to actually basically reach that pain point. So I was on pretty much drinking herbal teas every single day, like 3 times a day.
Hmm.
And I also used to get anxiety around that time and really low mood
Hmm.
as well. I think maybe just being over the pain and just being
Yeah.
like being afraid of having the period
Hmm.
again. And so I would take magnesium. And I usually, because of the IBS, I take the form which is a powder, which is citrate, and that it can loosen your bowels. So I'd be wary if you don't need that.
Yeah.
But it is so good because I mean, from what I've learned, it doesn't just reach the pain areas, but it can help your brain to actually cope with the stressors.
Mhm.
So you're just more fortified when that time comes. Even if you do have a few cramps, you're
Hmm.
able to sort of just, be a bit more
Yeah. Weather
armed
it.
for it.
Hmm.
Yeah, weather it. So there was that, but then also, I mean, food for me has been a roller coaster, and
Hmm.
I have learned what works for me now. And I know that when I was younger, I wasn't really eating enough, in general,
Mm.
just eating enough, and enough balanced meals. Um, I stumbled across a little bit of like research within lifestyle medicine, which I know you know a lot
Hmm.
about as well.
Yeah.
And it's just mind blowing, like just how much a balanced plate of food every single day
Yeah.
can impact you.
That plate that we learnt about in school with the
Yeah.
liquid, with the different colours,
Yeah,
a load of rubbish, just
literally.
absolute rubbish. Doesn't make any sense. And we'll be doing more episodes on the podcast about nutrition as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yes, getting the right, what I hear you saying, dosage, because a
Right.
lot of the time, we hear people talking about, okay, yeah, so for my period, someone said to take this tea. I had a cup, didn't help. Or okay, you know what, I need to be more active, so like, I sat outside, I went for a walk, had some fresh air, and I'm still having painful periods. But it's about the dose, and like you said,
Yeah.
you were consistent with the teas every day, 3 times a day, making sure
Yeah.
that you're getting, physical activity, not just like
Yeah.
going for a walk here and there, but actually making it a
Hmm.
consistent part of your life. um
Hmm.
a lot of the time, you're saying about the amount of food that you're eating, even
Yeah.
if you are picking healthy things, if you're not getting enough of what you need,
Yeah.
and a lot of the time with people wanting certain types of bodies and wanting to lose weight and different fads and things, people will start to cut down on things or not really
Yeah.
understand the importance of calories. And I hear a lot of people wanting to cut out carbs completely, not understanding, carbohydrates, glucose is literally what our body uses to respire. And
Hmm.
for the brain to function, it needs to have glucose. It's the only thing that it respires. And if we're cutting
Hmm.
out carbohydrates completely from our diets,
Hmm.
um how are we supposed to function? How are we
Hmm.
supposed to regenerate? How are we supposed to restore ourselves if we're doing all of that? And so
Hmm.
yes, getting the right things, but getting the right doses of it, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really important.
And I know it can seem like, to anyone listening, it's like, oh, but how do I know? And what do I do? And it can be quite overwhelming. And throughout this journey, they say healing isn't linear. Like throughout this journey, I've had lots of ups and downs, but I've always trusted, and I've always just said, well, if I'm stressing about this, then forget it, because
Mm-hmm.
that's just going to tip it over even more. So
Mm-hmm.
I used to be like trying to make sure I juice every day and do this and prep this meal. And I knew, we spoke about capacity. I know what my capacity is, and actually it's not very big. And I've had to accept that and be like, okay, well, what kind of things can I do? So I had to make sure, like, oh, actually, like learning about, for example, the protein and the fats. Like I never even, I used to be afraid of protein, literally. Like,
Mm.
sounds funny, but growing up, I mean, it was something that guys use,
Yeah, to get big and
for the
muscly, and
gym.
who wants to look like that?
Yeah, and the thing is, to this day, like there are young girls still like, oh, I don't want it to bulk me, so I don't really want to have lots of
Mm-hmm.
protein, or have this protein powder. But honestly, since actually uh like increasing my protein and my fats, I was able to like have a period that I felt that it wasn't debilitating, or
Mm-hmm.
the anxiety was reduced, like along with me actually exercising and actually taking rest. I was like, no, I feel like, where have I been all these years,
Mm-hmm.
like with all this information? And this wasn't stuff I had necessarily had to go and pay lots of money for.
Mm-hmm.
It's reading books. I read so much, and then just actually learning what kind of things made my body feel good, really.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but you said about some books that you read. I would love if at the end of this you could just give me a little list of books that were really useful for you, and then in the show
Sure, yeah.
notes and in the description box on YouTube, you can have a little look at some of these books to educate yourself a bit more. The
Hmm.
purpose of these podcasts, we won't be able to give you an individualized plan, but it's to
Hmm.
spark something in you to see, actually, if this is something I'm struggling, what can I do for myself today? And
Yeah.
so, tracking your period, getting to know your cycle, getting to know what symptoms you get when in the cycle, and also
Hmm.
understanding, we said to you, understanding about nutrition and what you actually need, and start looking into
Mm.
that a bit more.
Hmm.
So yeah, so honestly, this has been a brilliant conversation. Lots of food for
Yeah.
thought. Thank you, Destiny, for joining me. I've
No
really enjoyed it. I
worries.
hope you have too.
Yeah, I
Um,
have.
Real, can you just share with us where the listeners, the followers can subscribe to you or follow you? Yeah, where can we find you
Yeah.
online?
So I'm mainly on Instagram and yeah, just Instagram and Pinterest, but mainly Instagram, which is Destiny Jolivia. And that's pretty much the same as Pinterest as well. And I respond a lot to like DMs as well. Like my DMs are always open at the moment. I predominantly speak to a lot of women in my DMs, and we are having that conversation that they think is a bit TMI. There's no TMI, guys. Like,
Mm-hmm,
no TMI. It's important. We need to have these conversations. So I
mm-hmm.
always say DM me if you have any questions or queries or whatever. And I'm really active on Instagram. And as well, if you want to email me, then it's destinyjolivia@gmail.com. And I am open as well to emails.
Okay, brilliant. And please go ahead and follow Destiny, because honestly, the content you give is beautiful to watch, but it's also quite motivating, inspiring. When you share like, oh, this is where I'm on my period, or this is what I'm doing in
Yeah.
the kitchen today. I'm like, okay, yes, I need to make sure that I soak my beans today, and I need to make sure that I go outside
Yeah.
and do all these wonderful things. Yeah. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming on.
No
Guys, I hope
worries.
that you enjoyed. Please, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate and review it. And if you're on YouTube, please leave me a comment, subscribe, and I will see you again next week.